Good evening. My name is John Moore. I'm the host of the ZWAC Show, which is easier to say than the Zero Waste Advocacy Committee of the Northern California Recycling Association. So tonight's show is about scavenging, which I view to be sort of an ancient method of resource recovery, where community members on the sort of disadvantaged side of the socioeconomic spectrum, they collected materials that others didn't want. And they repurposed those materials and they upcycled those materials so that they could earn the ability to feed and clothe and shelter themselves. So on this show, we always try to feature a pioneer of resource recovery and recycling who can bring useful lessons from the way back, like we did last month with Ken Dunn, who operated the first community buyback center in the country and a compost facility on top of that. So we try to connect the pioneer with some current program or policy that we think is interesting and exciting. So there's 4 parts of the show tonight. The first part is the feature of Jay Weschler, our pioneer from the way back. He's best known to us as the father of Urbanore's Max Wexler. I'm not sure he intended to be remembered as Max Wexler's father, but that's how we think of him. And Mr. Wexler had an incredible career collecting exotic pieces of steel and other commercial metals that no one else wanted. And somehow he found a market to sell them because he knew who might want them and what they could do with them. So he's kind of a scavenger, but he's a scavenger in the same way that you could call Steven Spielberg a home movie maker. He's a little more advanced than that, but he has a great story that Susan Kinsella of our recycling archives is going to tell tonight. We know that ancient people scavenged. What they did that worked might be useful in learning what might work better today. I will talk a little bit about that, and I will talk especially about how an ancient method of reusing pottery was politically significant. Lastly, tonight, we're going to talk, not lastly tonight. One of the big, most interesting parts of tonight's show is we're going to feature a local program from Oakland, where disadvantaged communities of unhoused people are working to improve their communities, partly by recovering resources. And I am thrilled to have with us tonight, Ricky Ramos of the Oakland Downtown Streets program, or Downtown Streets team program, who will tell us about his program and what their work is. And the last part of the show tonight is 2 leaders of the Zero Waste.
You're using the computer.
I'm sorry.
That's my dad. I'm trying to teach him how to use Zoom.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Thanks.
Wexler, we're gonna come to your interview in about 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay. I don't think he can hear us right now, and that's the problem. I'm working on it. Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, the last segment of our show tonight is we'll have 2 of the leaders of Zero Waste USA, Youth USA, who are both active in the Northern California Recycling Association, Bonnie Betts and Freddie Coronado. They're going to talk about what they're up to with Zero Waste Youth and how Zero Waste Youth is reaching out to form partnerships
with
like-minded organizations. So, having previewed the show, we'll start the show. And we always start with the recycling archives, and we have our director of the archives, Susan Kinsella, who is a gifted reader. We have interviews from all these pioneer recyclers. And tonight, Susan is going to read excerpts from the interview with Mr. Jay Weschler. So I'll turn it over to Susan.
Thank you. Let's see. Well, let me tell you about Jay Weschler. Jay Weschler bought and sold scrap metal for a living. He started out by selling new steel products, but then he noticed that clients he was selling to also had discarded steel products that were off-spec or damaged in some way. And there, he saw a business opportunity. What I thought was especially awesome when I first read Jay's interview was how amazingly entrepreneurial he was, buying and selling scrap materials, often not knowing what exactly he was buying or what it could be used for, but then eventually matching it up with a use that someone had a need for. Things like buying 80,000 pounds of manufacturing stamping dies. These dies are forms in patterns that are used to stamp specific shapes out of steel to make lots of different kinds of products. This was 40 tons, 2 truckloads worth of dies left over from manufacturing in World War II that Jay bought, even though he didn't know much at all about them, and paid just about above scrap price for them. In a conversation with his son, Max, who's the operations manager at Urban Ore in Berkeley, Jay tells this story about how buying those manufacturing dies paid off. So Jay says, after 4 or 5 months, I get a call from the state prison in New Jersey. They were looking for motorcycle license plate blanks made out of 22 gauge cold rolled steel. And so I went to a small metal stamper and I got a price for stamping license plate blanks from a couple of the dies I found in those 80,000 pounds of dies I'd bought. I knew I could buy the steel cheap and I got the job. I started to supply the prison with license plate blanks that they could use. And that was my first stamping job. I used to drive the license plate blanks down to the state prison of New Jersey. And then sometime later, I got a call from General Electric's transformer division. They were looking for nut retainers, a little stamping called a nut retainer. And I went through all the dies and found one that would work. And then there was a second nut retainer needed, and I found a die for that too. So I was now supplying GE with nut retainers. Max, who did the interview with his dad, said, how did you figure out that the dies could make the product that GE wanted? Jay said, oh, well, I just knew the shape of what the finished piece was. And Max says, GE, I mean, that's a pretty big company. Was it a big job? And Jay says, yeah, it was pretty big. So after paying scrap metal prices for what amounted to 40 tons of dies, Jay says there were only 4 things that I could make using them. But those 4 things were lucrative jobs. And Jay says having the dies enabled me to go into the stamping business. So Max says, okay, so at first you acted kind of on a whim then. I mean, you bought the dies not really knowing what they were or how you would use them. Jay says, yeah, that's right. Max then comes back with, and then months later you get a call from the prison. And Jay says, yeah. And Max goes on with, that's impressive. What's impressive to me is that you were able to figure out how the dies worked and what they could actually make. I mean, that seems like it would take some sort of engineer or designer know-how. And Jay just offhandedly answers, yeah. So Max says, so it's not exactly recycling at that point. And Jay cuts him off. And Jay says, well, the dies were recycled from World War II. And the steel I used was not primary, it was drop-offs. Those drop-offs produced when companies had slitters. They ended up with different sized piles of steel scrap that they couldn't use. When they were shearing metal plate, they ended up with odd strips and blanks and stuff that I could use. Now, Jay was highly educated. He went to Lehigh University, and he says about it, there were a few valuable things I learned from Lehigh University, which helped. All freshmen entering students were required to take a machine course after the first year was up. It was a 2-week course in the summer. You learned how to use welding stuff and metal lathes and milling machines and, basic stuff. That was a very valuable course to me because I learned how to use all that metal forming machinery. And later on, I took an elective in basic metallurgy. That was also of use when I got into finding manufacturing uses for some kinds of scrap metal. And then Jay goes on to talk about how he made some of his deals. He says, the deals I liked best were the ones where I didn't have to touch the material I was selling. What that means is that he could just arrange for the materials to change hands without his having to take control of it first. And as he says, I tried not to touch it at all. Sometimes I would have stuff that I bought delivered right to the scrap buyer. For example, he says, I had a deal where I bought 3,000 tons of tank tracks from tanks that were down in Alabama for like $3 a ton. I don't think I even paid that because they had rubber on them, just, a small amount. I couldn't find anybody who wanted them. And finally, I found a guy. I looked up who had got them in previous auctions, and he bought them for $10 a ton. So I made like $30,000. Max says, and all you did was transport it, right? And Jay said, no, I didn't do anything. He transported it. I sold him that at the base. Max says it was just kept there. And Jay said, yep, didn't touch it. Then Jay goes on to describe the time he made an especially amazing deal. He says, but the deal where I made the 100 grand, I had to touch it, but not much. And Max says, tell me about the job where you made 100 grand. Jay says, okay, well, there were three ways the government got rid of their obsolete stuff. The first option, when they didn't want metals anymore, was to put all of it into lots in big warehouses and then take pictures of what they had on offer and put the big pictures into booklets, and then you could bid on it. And then there was a second way. They organized auctions. You came in and you sat down with other people who were interested in bidding. It was face-to-face competition. We bid on lots of stuff that way. The third way was the government would cancel a contract for something that was being made. The contracting office would put out a list of things that were for sale from these canceled contracts. I was on the local list for bidding opportunities. And of course, this was in around the Philadelphia area when Jay was doing this. One of the notices that they gave me was a tube manufacturer up below Eastern Pennsylvania. It was a company that was making big tubes for the government. They were electron tubes, 2 truckloads of them. I saw there were copper items in there, and there were nickel items, and there were steel items. But the intriguing part was the rings made of what was listed as PT, AU, and AG. At the end of the ceramic tubes they made, they brazed these rings. And I knew that that description meant that the rings were made of platinum, gold, and silver. So I bid my high price of $2,100 on the lot. My feeling was that the few guys who bid on it were junk men, and they didn't know what the symbols meant. But me, college graduate, I took chemistry. I knew what those abbreviations meant. So I got the lot, and I immediately took the copper, and I think the nickel, to a guy who bought copper. He had a factory, and got my money back. So I was already away clear there. And then I looked at the inventory of rings. I looked at that list, and I was able to calculate rough. I figured out how much of everything there was. So first thing I sent in was the gold. I mean, I didn't do this all immediately. I did it over time. I didn't want to go crazy, and it didn't take a lot of room to store it. The gold was a return of $40,000, which I took as coins, gold coins, rather than cash. The platinum was sold for $60,000. And there was some silver too, around $10,000 worth. So that's the story of the 100 grand. And Max says, well, what happened to the ceramic parts? Jay says, oh, they were a pain in the ass. I had them here at home. Some probably are still here. Jay has a junkyard lot right next to his home. I gradually got rid of them, but they were not a moneymaker. And Max then asks, well, what exactly does an electron tube do? What does an electron tube do? And Jay, who has gone through this whole big deal and everything, says, beats the shit out of me. So Max says, you've always had a knack for extracting value out of what others consider waste. And then Max asks a question that we include in pretty much all of our interviews. We get a wide range of interesting answers to it. Max says, next question. Do you think there's a spiritual side to recycling? And Jay just flatly says, no. And they both laugh. And Max says, please explain your view. Jay says, it's nothing spiritual. It's just that mankind will have to deal with recycling if he wants to exist on the planet. Otherwise, the planet will fill up with shit and he will not have any room. But I couldn't call that spiritual. I would call it a physical necessity. You can make it spiritual with a lot of hype, but when somebody walks down the beach and it's filled with litter and shit, is that spiritual? I don't think so. Well, thank goodness for people like Jay, who do a lot to keep cleaning up the planet and turning things that many think are useless into materials that can be reused or make new products and create new businesses.
Thank you, Susan. That's an amazing story of how one man's trash is another man's treasure.
Yep.
Now, Max, we usually like to ask questions of our interviewee. Do you think your dad can do that?
Yeah, let's try it.
You want to ask him one?
Dad, you should be able to hear me now, right? And now, yeah, okay. So now is when you want to click on that microphone next to the video icon, and then everyone will be able to hear you. So now's the time to click on that microphone icon that we talked about earlier. Right now you can hear me, but nobody can hear you. So on the lower left,
Okay, can you?
yes,
Yeah.
you
Yes.
did it. Good job. Okay, now we can talk. And everyone can see you pick your nose too. Okay,
So, Mr.
So,
Wexler,
this is John Moore.
I'm Urbanore's lawyer.
You what?
I am Urbanore's lawyer, so thank you for
Oh,
joining.
you're everyone's lawyer. Oy, oy, oy.
Aye, right. So thank you for doing such a great parenting job on Max. That's more than as much of an achievement as anything with the recycling, I think. Thank you. But I have one question,
Yeah,
and I read your interview. So going back to those government contracts, the canceled contracts,
yeah,
the ones in which you got the gold and the platinum and the silver.
yeah,
At some point, they stopped putting those out to bid, right?
At some point, what?
Didn't they stopped putting them out to bid, didn't they?
So I bid on them. Is that what you want to know?
The canceled contracts you were talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Did the government stop putting those out to bid?
I don't
the go-
understand the question.
Did the government stop putting them out to bid?
Oh, yeah, they changed, eventually, they changed it and some big corporations took over all that.
Okay.
They wanted their bite out of it. And so guys like me were out of the picture.
So you at one time looked into going into the maple syrup business, right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
And I think you said in the interview that after you looked at it, it took too much capital and too much work to get into the business, right?
Yeah.
Was that because it was kind of a long-standing business where everybody locked up the business already with contracts?
It would take a long time the reason I got into that was they had a new method of collecting the syrup, the sap,
Right.
to make the syrup. And that was tubing, plastic tubing, instead of buckets. They no longer, some of the guys, instead of using buckets, they put plastic spouts into each tree. It had to be on a slope. And down at the bottom, and they would connect the smaller plastic tubes to the larger ones. Down at the bottom, there would be a big container, a galvanized steel container, and that started when it got a little warmer. That would fill up, and a guy would come around in a truck, like a 1,000-gallon truck, and take that to the evaporator.
So why did you decide not to go into that business?
Oh, because because to develop a system like that, you would really have to, first of all, either buy a lot of land, and then you would have to either plant trees, such an arrangement that it would work, or do a lot of cutting through existing trees. And also a lot of investment in all that equipment. And at that time, I didn't have it. It would take years to develop it.
So going back to the dyes that
Yeah.
Susan talked about, when you looked at those dyes, how did you know that you could make money out of them?
I didn't.
You took a risk.
Yeah, it was a small risk because it was very, if the price of scrap went up, I could get my money out.
Right. Well, thank you for being here and answering. Does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Wexler?
Jay, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dan Knapp. I did the edit on your interview, and I just want to tell you what a pleasure it was to read your interview and to see what an incredible genius you have for making money out of nothing. I think I have a little bit of that myself. And we both have a fatherly interest in your son, Max, who has done very, very well at Urban Ore.
I didn't know it was an interview when I thought he was just getting family history.
No, it's more than that, Jay. You're the only, right now, we have about 50 to somewhere between 50 and 60 or maybe more interviews, and yours is the only one that I know of that where you started before Earth Day. Everybody else kind of gets started on Earth Day or afterwards. And you're one of the early ones, the real serious pioneers. And I know there are thousands of more like you, and I hope to be able to find some of them anyway, who are still alive and get their memories down too, because passing those memories on to the next generation is really one of the most satisfying things you can do at our age.
Thank you.
Mary Lou, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to say that your story is for the reason that Dan was just talking about. I started, I'm an environmental journalist and I'm an environmentalist, and that's how I got into this whole dimension. And to encounter somebody who was doing it before the environmental awareness happened is a really interesting thing. And to have you be there already, doing it as, you say, well, it's a practical thing. You can't go to the beach if you don't clean it up. Well, yes, that's true. Our friend Nancy Gorell says, if we didn't have composting, we'd be knee deep in dinosaurs. So, encountering somebody who sees it as just an extension of practical living is really interesting. It's a whole different perspective. And we could use a lot more of that, that practicality and that vision. So I just wanted to say, it's really interesting to meet you.
Thanks.
Max,
There are some parts of your story I'm really interested in hearing a lot more about, but I think they're in the interview, and you might not want to go into those parts of your tale right now. Anyway,
right. But Max has one chance to ask his father something, and it's being recorded at the same time. So, do you want to take the shot, Max?
I was not prepared with a question, but if anyone knows someone who would be a good partner for my dad, I'm trying to convince him to move out here. So if anyone's single that you know of in his age range, that would be good motivation. And yeah, just thanks, Dad, for doing this. I'm not sure if you knew what this was about or understand it totally, but a lot of people, including myself, really appreciate your story and everything you've done. We were just at the beach, and as soon as we got off the beach, the first thing you did was reach into the recycling can and grab 3 aluminum cans up there to bring home, and he schlepped a whole garbage bag full of cans to bring back home to recycle in the car. And I mean, I reread the interview recently, and do I have any questions right now? I don't know, Dad. Do you think the scrap market's gonna go up? What do you think the state of the scrap markets are right now, and how do you think they're gonna change in the next few years?
Anybody's guess. It depends a lot on the tariffs. That they said they're removing the tariffs, steel from China, If that happens, that should reduce the price of steel quite a bit.
Okay.
Can I make a comment about the question of partnerships? I just helped my sister move, my older sister, I'm only 77, she's 84, and I just helped her move into an independent living facility. And if you're looking for a partner, just walk in the door and you will have more women than you can shake a fist at. It's just, or shake a stick, or whatever you want to shake at them. There's going to be lots of women who are interested.
There you are, Max. That's for you.
Okay. Great.
Well, sorry to put you on the spot.
I think I ended up asking a decent question.
I think you did. Does anybody else have any questions of Mr. Wexler?
Are you still doing it?
Very little. I still do it, but very little. I have a 3-acre, I live in a junkyard. It's 3 acres. And it's not cleaned out completely yet. Some people drop off stuff. But I'm still in the manufacturing end of it. I make some stampings that go into, they're called roof deck accessories. And they go into new industrial buildings. That's my main business now.
Where did you get your nose for being able to make money out of nothing? How did you develop that? Where'd that come from?
Well, that came from the dies when I found out that I could make parts myself. I then I was I was selling corrugated sheets that they use on a roof deck, called roof decking, and I was using at the end where they're rolling on a big roll like toilet paper. At the end, they have odd sizes that accumulate, and when they got a truckload of them, they sold them to me at a cheap price, and I would find a use for them.
And you got the entrepreneurial nose to be able to do that. And where did that fall on you from the sky? How did you develop the sense that I could go do that?
What happened then was I noticed drums in the plant where they were making the roof decking, which had little metal stampings, which were used, which they shipped. They bought those stampings and shipped them with an order of roof decking from a building. So I got a couple samples of that, and by that time I was stamping the dies from World War II, and I went to that source and showed her that and got a price. And then I came back to the original plant price and said, "What do you pay for them?" 5 cents a piece. I said, "Would you buy them for me for 4.5 cents?" Yeah. That's how I got into that. And that led to a whole, like 20 different little stampings that I made as a result of that, just for the roof deck industry. And that's what I still do.
If you
just have a nose for opportunities and how to make something happen. That's just automatic. You just automatically do it.
Max is running it now from California.
If you come to California, you're going to open a business out here?
No, I'm too old.
Okay.
I was wondering what's your heart, I was wondering what item you have at your scrapyard that's the hardest to find a market for.
good question.
The jet engines were there for 20, 25 years.
Well, I can't answer that. It depends on the quantity, usually, of most stuff.
Oh, we used to have a friend, our Dan's old friend, Mark Gurrell used to say, a big enough pile of anything is worth something.
That's right. There you go.
That's a good line to end, I think, to end this segment. Mr. Wexler, I'm going to move on to our interview with the community recycling in Oakland. You're welcome, more than welcome, to stay and listen, see what's going on in Oakland community recycling.
Okay, Dad, at this point, click on that microphone symbol again to mute yourself, and then I'll call you and instruct you how to get out of the meeting.
Okay, hold on.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Max.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to interview Ricky Ramos in just a moment about the Downtown Streets team, but I had promised that we would talk about ancient peoples and scavenging. So I wanted to do that for a moment. We tried to get someone to talk about how indigenous communities in California recycled and weren't able to. We tried to get an archaeologist at Tulane University to talk about how they recycled in ancient Rome and couldn't get her. So instead of them, and we'll do one of them in a future show, I'm going to tell a short story, which starts with my wife and my trip to northern New Mexico before the pandemic. And we stayed at a famous mineral springs in Ojo Caliente, I guess a gringo named that. And it was next to a historic site which had once been the home of a pueblo by name of, and I'm going to garble the pronunciation, Posi Owinghe, I think is how you pronounced it. And the archaeologist told us that at one time, 800 years ago, this was a 2,000 room pueblo. And as far as anybody knows, at some point, the people of the pueblo just up and left for reasons unknown. And they left behind pottery shards so that you could walk to this site, and we did at dusk on a stormy, thunderstormy night. And we found these middens of pottery shards all over the place. You could, if you wanted to, you could pick them up. You know, we didn't, but they were all over. And it made you stop and think, and it was kind of a spiritual thing, that these people left this stuff behind. Why did they do that? What are we leaving behind? The people are going to find 800 years from now. And I don't know the answer. They put a lot of effort into making pottery. They had the clay, they had to glaze it, they had to shape it. And I guess they didn't have any ability to reclaim it. So they left it behind. But that leads me to the other part of the story, the pottery shards. The Pueblo people in New Mexico didn't find a use for them, but the ancient Greeks did, on something that we've heard a little bit about. In ancient Greece, the pottery shards were called ostrake, I think is the Greek name for it. And the ancient Greeks did, and they found evidence of this, that they used them sort of as, like we might use black balls. We put them into the bag, whoever draws the black ball loses. They wrote the names of politicians on the back of these ostrake. And they would essentially put them into a bag like they were voting. And whatever politician got the most names written down on the back of these pottery shards got expelled from the community, from which we get the name ostracize. So that is my story of how ancient pottery shards could be used for a political purpose. And so with that, I turn it over to Ricky Ramos. Thank you, Ricky, for coming. You're with the Downtown Streets team. Start by telling us about the program, about the organization.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be part of this conversation. Just the conversation around salvage and recycling is something that's been interesting to me for quite a while. So I thought it was a really cool opportunity to come and speak with you all. I'm here from Downtown Streets team in Oakland. Downtown Streets team is a nonprofit organization that engages unhoused folks in community beautification work. We have 16 cities in Northern California that are running this program. that range from Salinas up to Petaluma and east out to Sacramento. The way our program works is our team members or our participants that are experiencing homelessness volunteer in 4-hour shifts that are all peer-led to do cleanup work, where they're removing debris from streets and parks and waterways and neighboring encampments. And depending on contracts, we can do inside of buildings work. And in exchange for their volunteering in Downtown Streets team, they receive case management and employment coaching to remove what we call barriers to self-sufficiency. So a lot of folks experiencing homelessness don't have vital documentation. They are food insecure, they're clothing insecure, they need support with transportation. And we do everything we can in our organization to make sure those needs are met. So whether that's social service navigation, finding housing opportunities and job opportunities, or the stipend that they earn by volunteering, that they can then use to get gift cards to grocery stores or pharmacies or transportation access. They can use their earned stipends to pay phone bills and rent. We're trying to remove all of these barriers to self-sufficiency to get people out of survival mode and into like a goal setting or a stable mode where they can look at re-entering the workforce. And I can pause there to answer any more questions around Downtown Streets team before I talk about our enterprise model.
Well, that's a lot of amazing stuff. And because we're here talking about scavenging and recycling, I'm curious, the things that they collect as part of the cleanup activity, what does that consist of and what happens to the stuff?
It's a great question. And just to start, we do so much work cleaning up. I think last year I put together our East Bay numbers. So we have programs in Hayward, Berkeley, and Oakland. And our teams in those 3 communities removed 225,000 gallons of debris off of the streets in a year. So that's from July of last year to June of this year. That included 28,000 cigarette butts and 700 syringes. And what we collect, when we collect recyclables, so plastics or aluminum cans, we take those to like local recyclers, and we use the cash that we earn from that to throw like parties for our team members. We get pizza and sodas and drinks, and sometimes we'll bring in guest speakers and do a workshop with that money. But we try to use it to, incentivize recycling. All of the cigarette butts that we collect, we send to another recycling space that turns the butts into park benches. There's a way to break them down and recycle those into park benches. And we safely dispose of our sharps through needle exchange programs. And then everything else, all of the debris, the trash, gets either disposed of through public works or waste management dump sites. A lot of it is done, where we are bagging it up and they're collecting the bags that we're leaving behind.
So on previous month's shows, we've talked a lot about the community redemption centers, which it sounds like is one of the outlets that you would take the bottles and cans and plastic to. And a lot of those centers have closed, especially in Oakland. And from the description of what you were doing, it sounds like less money for the party from that. So how has the closure of the redemption centers in our local communities impacted your program?
It's a great question. And I want to advocate for our team members here and say that we have a peer leadership model where, the folks that are out doing the street cleaning are all led by other unhoused folks. I'm only there to check in and make sure shift is running to a standard, but they're leading themselves. And should they desire the recycled materials to throw a party, I will go with them to do this exchange, but they're all in charge of like putting the recyclables together and inviting me to go with them to a recycler and represent Downtown Streets team there. So, a lot of them will drive however far they need to. Usually there's one in Oakland. I know there's one in Berkeley that we've gone to a couple of times. There's one in San Leandro, but it's on the initiative of our team members to make a lot of this happen. So they're very aware. The folks that are experiencing homelessness are aware of where these recyclers are, and they take me to them.
So how does it impact this community to have those outlets reduced? Because we have a lot of talk about Sacramento favoring certain elements of the redemption center, and the recycling centers seem to come in last. But I'd like to know what the impact on your team members is from that, if you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can assume that it's just travel time and costs associated with travel. You need to own a vehicle for a lot of them, which is a barrier. Some places require, vital documentation to do an exchange. They won't just give you straight cash. And so those are all barriers, but I would assume that the biggest challenge our team members face is just ease of access to get into there. And I did see a question, so I want to make sure I get the chance to answer.
Hi, thank you very much. Yes, I have a question. Dan and I have often actually talked about the idea that so many of these homeless encampments they're just so trashy. They look terrible. And it's one of the big reasons, in my opinion, that the homeless people are made to be unwelcome. And how you sound like just the guy who could help people learn to pick up after themselves and keep it neat in the first place, and set up good recycling systems where they are. If just because they're unhoused doesn't mean they're not living somewhere, they are. So how can they be trained? Can they be trained? Can they learn with each other? What incentives would help them develop the habit of keeping the place clean in the first place? And the community would be so much more welcoming. Can people be incentivized to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have two responses to that. One is, Downtown Streets team is out there to try to change perceptions of homelessness. And there's a lot of stigma attached to encampments and unhoused people. There's, and John and I were speaking before the show around goodwill dumping, where folks will come in with, used furniture or, used clothes and leave that behind at encampments. There's the issue of trash services. Encampments don't have trash services, and almost everything that's being consumed in an encampment produces trash, whether that's, the food that they're getting for free from shelters or from takeout. That's all producing trash, and there's nowhere to put this trash that's being accumulated. And so it just lives there once they use it. And then Downtown Streets team can reach as far as it can reach, right? When our biggest success is in a few of our communities, we've set up direct partnerships with large encampments in cities where we're providing an active trash service. And, we've noticed that over time, as Downtown Streets team spends months in these encampments, removing debris and safely discarding it at dump sites, the amount of debris we're collecting month over month reduces. So people are creating less trash when access is given to them.
So let me, that sort of segues into something you and I were talking about earlier. And that's sort of the format for this is I conduct an interview and then I turn it over to the group for questions. So I will make sure that everybody gets to ask you what they want. But
yeah,
the beautification that we're talking about, it looks like the governor has, found some money to use to improve cleanliness in streets. And it looks like Downtown Streets team is going to be a grant recipient to help it do that. So tell us about the grant program that you're going to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's through the Clean California grant. And that gives great opportunity now to introduce our employment model. So Downtown Streets team is all voluntary. And it's about creating an opportunity for somebody to get back on their feet and enter employment or sustainability or self-sufficiency. And we've created what we call Streets Team Enterprises, which is a low barrier employment model. That's a direct kind of step out of the Downtown Streets team program into supportive employment. So the challenge we are facing with a lot of our team members is in DST, you reform an identity, you have community, you gain stability. And then when we turn you over to, Home Depot or McDonald's and you think about employment, that employer doesn't have a lot of empathy for your situation. So, we'd see a lot of people either want to stay with DST and not want to go to employment, or turn over to employment and then get let go within 30 days because they're tardy to work or they don't know how to use their cell phone or they show up late too much. And so Streets Team Enterprises is this branch where we can hire people directly. We can offer them a fair wage, part-time work, and build a resume. It takes a job to get a job oftentimes, build a resume. And so with this Clean California grant, there's a really unique position that we're creating to tackle illegal dumping. And that position is called an illegal dumping coordinator. It's kind of managed in 3 parts, 1 by Downtown Streets team, 2 by a local recycler called Argent Materials, and 3 by the district attorney's office. And this position, you know, we get to respond to 311 calls that are on illegal dumping and go and remove the discarded items and bring them to the dump site. And Waste Management's offering us free access to their dump site. The DA is training these 2 individuals on how to discover what's called indicia, which is identifying information in illegal dumps. So we're trying to figure out like commercial businesses that are dumping, and tie it back to that business. So, you know, the DA's office can generate, you know, revenue and use it to mitigate illegal dumping. And they get to work with us to support our teams in broader work. You know, we get to cover more miles of street when we can guarantee that those bags are being collected and taken to the dump. So they'll follow behind our ships and remove the bags. And, you know, the idea of this illegal dumping coordinator came out of conversations through Nate Miley's task force on illegal dumping, and just this unique need to engage the unhoused population, create jobs, and tackle illegal dumping kind of all in the same conversation. And, you know, I see a lot of potential there. And attending the conference in April that Nate and Miley put on illegal dumping in the state, I think that there's a huge economy on, you know, upcycling and skilled and unskilled labor in that space. You know, you look at recycling centers, thrifting stores, reupholstery, refinishing, carpentry work, metal work. These are all like low barrier employment models where you can enter as unskilled and exit skilled. And what Streets Team Enterprises has done in Oakland is run a subsidized employment model where the city pays us to hire people, and then we partner with local companies or nonprofits to place our employees there. And so they're receiving professional development coaching, case management, and support through us, but they get the on-the-job internship experience at an employer. And if that model, which has been successful for us, was to be made broad, you know, if you can imagine a reupholstery store being incentivized to hire one of Streets Team Enterprises employees, where they don't have to pay for that employee. They get to work with them for 6 months. And then if they like them, they can hire them full time. And the person that we're managing gets an internship experience and, you know, marketable skills. You can really build an economy around creating that type of work. And our illegal dumping coordinator gets to see through the 311 calls they're responding to, you know, what type of items are being discarded on the streets the most. They'll be able to navigate, you know, who needs to be taking care of the type of items that they're seeing. I think that, you know, I also learned in this task force that over 60% of the furniture that you find discarded on the streets is still usable. It's just, you know, old to somebody, but if it were to get reupholstered or refinished, you could resell it. And there's that type of job, there's just not an economy, a workforce built around it. And I see Streets Team Enterprises kind of plugging into it.
That's what I wanted to recap. That sounds very exciting. That's really kind of what excited me about talking to you tonight, because it sounds like you've got an infrastructure that's designed to promote employment of the unhoused to the point where you can actually be the employer. You're already doing work training in the resource recovery space. How far can that expand? And is there something that anybody on this call today can do to help?
Yeah,
because it sounds like you have a built-in workforce, a labor-intensive kind of job. You got on-the-job training, and you're doing a great thing all at the same time. What could be better than that?
Yeah, you know, I wish I had an immediate answer to that question. Our Clean California funding comes in August. So all of this still very much lives in the idea space, right? And we get 2 years of this Clean California funding to really pilot out what it can look like, where you have a shared employment model and you know, you're building the on-the-job skills that can transition into full-time jobs. And I'm trying to build a group of individuals that want to share best practices in that space. There's not a lot of programs that are this subsidized employment model where it's kind of like a staffing agency, but to have it be through the lens of, the unhoused population and low skill work is a unique approach to it. So I'm doing a lot of research here in Alameda County and then leaning on some of my other peers across their cities to build a network of folks that want to create this type of employment model. And I would love to, expand the people in that group. Additionally, if you can work with folks to find that unskilled position at a reupholstery store or a refinishing store, carpentry type work, recycling centers where, they would be interested in hiring the demographic that I'm working with, knowing that, we're paying their wages, but they have to manage them day to day. Would love to build that portfolio of businesses as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of plumbing.
Yeah.
In a good way. But there's another question I have to ask, and I hesitate because you're getting a grant through the district attorney's office from the state. Those are government folks. But at the same time, there have to be regulatory barriers to doing what you'd like to do. There's a negative impression about homeless people. There is local communities criminalizing scavenging. Why they would do that, I have no idea. But from where you sit, what are the biggest regulatory barriers to doing what you'd like to see done, if any?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate in Alameda County, so much of the media that we consume around homelessness often has a negative lens on it. And I would love to find more opportunities to try to counter that lens and get to know the people that are experiencing homelessness. I could tell stories of the team members that I'm working with and why they got into the situation they're in. And the folks that have recovered and found employment and found housing and the spaces that they're in now. There's just a lot of ignorance in the systemic hold on homelessness. It's so difficult for folks independently to move through that experience back into the workforce once they've entered it. And that isn't being talked enough about. For example, if you are on Social Security income and you get a housing voucher to move into an apartment that is being subsidized, that housing voucher is based on the fixed income that you're getting through your Social Security. And so if you get a job and start earning more money, you lose your housing voucher. So oftentimes people are not incentivized to make an income. And that is a huge barrier towards economic recovery and becoming self-sufficient.
Yeah, that's a very practical point. And of course, it's always the least advantaged that get demonized in a community by ignorant people. So I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, scavenging in particular has been demonized for centuries. And you'll notice that over in India, where they have a caste system, they claim they don't anymore, but really they do. They have the whole scavenging stratum in India is the lowest stratum. It's not new.
So Doug, I see you have a question. Doug Grooms is the co-chair of our committee. He's also done a lot of the First Friday cleanup activities in Oakland. So he's been in the trenches. Doug, do you want to ask something?
Well, yeah, I'm really impressed in what you're doing, but I'm wondering, can this be duplicated in other major cities? I was in LA this past weekend and saw a lot of homeless encampments, tent cities and things as such. Are there any efforts to kind of use your blueprint to, in other major metropolis cities that there's, the same kind of a blight and, people needing, help like that you're providing?
Yeah, the short answer is not yet. The long answer is we're building an affiliate network where we're vetting organizations on our model and their ability to implement our model. We, at 16 cities in Northern California, want to make sure that our central location in San Jose is still within reach of all of our communities so you can have quality control on what's going on. We've looked at LA and Santa Barbara and Portland and Seattle and Texas, like Dallas, as spaces to expand downtown streets teams too. But currently we just don't have the internal capacity to build an affiliate network with enough oversight where we can ensure that our program model is being met.
Well, if you make it work here, other people will copy it, right?
Yeah, that's the hope, and with this Clean California grant and the illegal dumping coordinator position, it's really a first of its kind in downtown streets team. And I haven't really seen a position like it in the research I've done. And so there's a lot to kind of pilot out and figure out what works and what doesn't, and hopefully make it successful and expand.
So you've mentioned a term a couple of times that you and I talked about during the cocktail hour, which is the illegal dumping. And I asked you, why is it that people are illegally dumping stuff on homeless encampments? And you gave me the answer, but I'd like you to repeat it.
Yeah, I talked about goodwill dumping with you, where folks, they're like moving apartments and they don't know what to do with their couch, and they don't know what to do with their box of plates that they don't want anymore. And ease of access in Alameda County to a dump and the cost of bringing stuff to a dump is often really big. And up until recently, if you were renting, your landlord had to request a bulky item pickup. And so for a tenant to get their couch picked up from in front of their apartment, you had to get your landlord on board and coordinate a pickup date. And there's just all of these barriers to doing that. Luckily, that's been removed, but I don't think that's been communicated that effectively. And so people just left stuff in front of their house, or they would bring it to encampments thinking that like these people could use this. They could benefit from this. There's value for my waste for an encampment, but really it just expands the amount of trash collected in an encampment. And it as was spoken about earlier, it changes the perception of, these folks are just accumulating trash. They're not even bringing it there oftentimes. It's just showing up there.
Do you really think it's mostly charitable dumping, or is there punitive dumping going on at the same time?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you look, it's been so interesting to work at the DA's office. If you look at Wood Street as an example, so much of the stuff being discarded there is commercial waste, like building materials. And it's, small commercial businesses that don't want to pay the dumping fees over and over and over again, that are going in and getting rid of wood and metal and, nails and dump. Like I've seen in my time doing outreach there, just dump trucks come in, pull up, dump tons of waste, and then drive away. And part of what we're trying to do with this illegal dumping coordinator is inform unhoused citizens of how to collect evidence for that to lead to enforcement, right? And there's a way in which we're still working out the DA's office to incentivize that type of reporting. Oftentimes, the barriers are like needing a phone and then showing up to court and all of that. So through us, we're trying to be able to house a lot of the information that's being collected at the encampments. But yeah, there's commercial businesses that are just pulling up to the sides of roads and encampments and dumping truckloads of stuff.
Well, that's appalling to me. And I'm so glad that there's somebody like you working on it, because there sounds like so many different parts of the puzzle. It's hard to keep them all in your head, I imagine. Does anybody have other questions for?
Dan here.
I see Marley's hand up first.
Sorry, Dan. I do want to ask, it sounds to me like what you're calling charitable dumping and illegal dumping, and let's show them how to make a complaint and get it enforced on. It sounds to me like there is in fact a bona fide opportunity. I mean, that's what Urban Ore does, is we go to the dump and we salvage things that we can find a market for. So could that illegal dumping be turned into an opportunity? And business development?
Yes. Working in the demographic I'm in, the energy spent on making the phone call to say that this item is now in front of my tent may not show up that frequently unless there's a whole culture shift around that. I think the more time I spend in the space, folks that are camping are in such a survival mode that their first thought is not to like, how can I get this to Urban Ore, and like, can I load this in a vehicle, or who has a vehicle, or can they come pick it up and let me coordinate all of that. And so, through the funded positions, we're going to get a glimpse into that space. And, I would love to set up a relationship with Urban Ore where if we find salvageable materials, we can bring it there. but yeah, I do see a barrier with working with the unhoused community to build a direct connection between illegal dumping and encampments and salvage work.
Bonnie, do you have a question? I'll get to you next. Bonnie?
Yeah, my question was more about mental health with the funding that you'll be receiving in the enterprise framework that you're talking about. Like, do your team members have access to mental health services?
I wish I could say that we built in mental health services in-house. No one at Downtown Streets team is a therapist, psychology major or master's. And this leads to the conversation of mental health services availability is so there's nothing there. It's so minimal. And my partner's a therapist, and we have this conversation all the time. There needs to be more jobs created in that space. And oftentimes the folks that are doing work at the community level that are trying to provide free or affordable healthcare to people are young or still in school. And so the exposure to burnout rate is really high. And then the jobs that are created for community mental health work are not offering competitive enough salaries versus, private healthcare and, private mental health care. And so there's just not enough mental health services, especially in Alameda County. And, we recognize that as a challenge within Streets Team Enterprises. And it's, again, this model is 2 years old, and we've really grown in the last couple months here. And the executive director of Streets Team Enterprises has a master's in counseling psychology and runs a private practice in mental health in recovery work. So folks that were in jail on life sentences and get released, helping them reform identity. And so I know that part of his long-term build is to build in mental health services for these folks. And speaking personally, I've watched through Streets Team Enterprises, one of my employees go from camping to temporary housing to leasing their own apartment. And the identity shift that goes on in each of those phases is so significant. And if you are prone to addiction or if you just don't have the resources in front of you, it's so easy when you get overwhelmed with these changes that are happening in your life to fall back on bad patterns. And it took calling this person multiple times a week and making sure they're showing up to their appointments and visiting them at their apartment and, teaching them how to do their dishes again. And the transition from homelessness into self-sufficiency requires so much mental health support. And I hope to see that expanded.
Dan, did you have a question?
Thank you.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Ricky, you're a young person. I'm very impressed with your can-do attitude, but I would like to inquire as to your educational background. You're obviously well studied, and I also would like to have you comment on the rewards of what you are doing. You seem very happy about what you're doing. Do you recommend this for other young people?
Oh, thank you. I studied sociology at San Francisco State, and I was blessed to have a mentor named Myron Johnson, and he taught peace and nonviolence studies. He worked with MLK in the US and taught a course on Gandhi and a course on Socrates, and I took 2 years of his courses, and he was my mentor and inspired me to use my degree for good. Inspired me to join AmeriCorps, and that community led me to Oakland and doing community work in Oakland. And so, yeah, it started with general understanding of systemic oppression and disadvantaged communities and lack of resources there, and having a caring mentor that I could meet with weekly and talk about where I'm going after college, and a couple professional opportunities. And, the joy that I get. So working at Downtown Streets Team has incredible highs and incredible lows. I was speaking about John, who transitioned from camping into, self-sufficient employment and housing. And those highs are so incredible, to be part of that person's journey and have them call you in their now full-time job and you know, thank you and show up to spaces with gifts and have that relationship and knowing you change people's lives is incredibly rewarding. And I would say that's a small percentage of the stories that I see. And, you know, the day-to-day struggle of seeing people that are dealing with mental health and addiction and dealing with the experience of homelessness is low. Balance, work-life balance, right? I put a lot of myself into the work that I do so I can show up and feel positive. And I also make sure I take care of myself by doing hobbies and interests that bring me joy, and advocating for like a 40-hour work week that's kind of set at a 40-hour work week. So you have time to take care of yourself is part of this. And yeah, I think I'm just lucky to find something that I'm passionate about and I'm good at and be able to get paid to do it.
That's a gift in life. That really is a gift. To enjoy what you're doing and be paid for it.
Yeah, and the new challenges, I'm always looking for new challenges, right? And so to tie together all of this conversation, the opportunity with the illegal dumping coordinator position and working with, you know, the DA's office, which is a Alameda County public office, to work with local private companies with invested interest in keeping the streets clean and to lead it from a nonprofit perspective. I think that those types of unique collaborations are answers to many of our problems in urban poverty, where you can bring together these collaborative communities that are cross-sectoral. And I was looking for the opportunity to kind of do that here in Oakland, and I've got a chance to do it. So that challenge and opportunity kind of pushes me forward.
Super. Does anybody else have any questions for Ricky? Because I know he has a soccer game tonight.
I sure do.
Susan?
Yeah, I just threw something into the chat. You might find it interesting to look into this New York's illegal idling bounty law, which is people apparently are making money off of reporting in people who are illegally idling. And so I'm wondering if you're thinking about, like, look at that as a model, like working with the DA's office to see about getting people bounties, and they get some percentage of, you know, whatever money is charged the people who have done the illegal dumping.
Yeah, no, and I've seen also in, I think it's in Austin, Texas, when vehicles are parked blocking bike lanes, if you take a photograph of that vehicle and submit it, you get a percentage of the fine that's given. And so I think, yeah, at the immediate level, that could work if you can, you know, get a photograph of a license plate of a vehicle that's illegally dumping in an encampment. The hard part about that is that we're dealing with people without addresses and reliable access to communication. So to tie that back to a bank account or an individual is a challenge. But I do think that it's an opportunity that can exist.
Great. I think you're being very creative. That's great.
You probably know this, but Oakland and the DA's office also has a, I don't know what they call it. It's a anti-blight ordinance where they have, the DA's office has a unit that cites and then fines people who are, you know, don't clean up their properties. It's not a big stretch to expand that into the illegal dumping at homeless encampments and, you know, citing people and having a bounty program to enforce that. Just a thought that occurred to me.
Yeah, and an exiting piece on all of this is that what I get to see in the work that I'm doing is that, you know, it's not just giving people income really that the problem lies in. There's so many other things tied to it. And I think community and identity outside of homelessness is a huge piece. And so, you know, as much as we can encourage folks to make a quick buck by reporting on illegal dumping, there needs to be a community of people that allow that person to express themselves in a healthy way, and integrate back into a workforce more so than just pay them for reporting.
Well, Ricky, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I was excited what you had to say. I feel the positive energy coming. I'd like to get involved. I hope others will too. And so thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. I will put my email in the chat and would love to hear from anybody. Oh, quick plug. If you want to visit me in Oakland, our community meetings are Thursdays at 12:30 p.m. And they bring together all of our team members and our staff and guests. Our address is 3100 Fruitvale. It's on the corner of School Street and Fruitvale, right off 580. And if you want to come by, yeah, we'd love to see you.
Great, thank you. So the final portion of our show tonight was Bonnie. You wanted to talk about zero waste youth. I don't see Freddie, so.
Yeah, Freddie let me know that he is not able to join, so I am open to just giving a little spiel about zero waste youth. I was thinking that I could share my screen just to have a visual aid. I can get situated here. Let's see.
So you'll talk to us about what Zero Waste Youth is doing and how you're reaching out to partner with others?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Just so for the benefit of those who are not familiar with Zero Waste Youth, I'll just be talking about our organization today. My name is Bonnie, and I've been with Zero Waste Youth since 2019, and we're a youth-led organization founded in 2011 in Brazil. So we have a San Francisco chapter, which is the USA chapter of an international organization. We have orgs all over the world: Brazil, Costa Rica, the Philippines, Portugal, Italy. So we're really connected in with the zero waste community internationally. And what we do with the organization, we like to get together and do beach cleanups and beach audits. And we also hold an annual convergence every year. The Zero Waste USA holds one every year, but there also is an international convergence. But because of the pandemic, that has not been in the works. So still waiting to hear updates for the international convergence. And so lately, what we've been doing during the pandemic is still doing our beach cleanups and also planning for our convergence. We would just hold a virtual convergence. And well, what we like to do at Zero Waste Youth is get the youth community who's interested in zero waste and provide leadership skill building opportunities. We just like to get together and hang out and have fun, but also with these leadership skills that they're building, really giving them the confidence to become advocates in their schools and their communities and their green teams at schools, whichever. So then the convergence is a great way to bring them back and have them share what they've been doing in their communities. During the pandemic, it has been hard. Just the bread and butter of our organization is in-person events. Like, we have so much fun together, but we've been trying to make it work virtually and with the beach cleanups. And so we've been partnering with California State Parks and also local conservation corps such as San Jose. We've been partnering with them on beach cleanups. And then we also have a connect for Angel Island. So we went out to Angel Island and we went camping on the island and helped out with a beach cleanup there a few times. And what's really exciting with our partnerships is with the San Jose Conservation Corps. They have a zero waste fellowship program where they're going into schools and they're educating on just greening the cafeterias. They have a contract with a local school district, and so they get to go out to 16 campuses and educate folks. And so Zero Waste Youth USA is wanting to build this partnership so that we can provide educational resources and just any kind of resources to help them with their education efforts, and also continue with the beach cleanups. A little more about our annual convergence. Every year we do one, we bring out a keynote speaker. Back in October, we brought out Carla. She's a tribal councilwoman of the Carmel tribe in Southern California. So it was really great. We really prioritized diversity as well as intersectionality of the environmental movement. So it's not just like zero waste, but we really try to bring in folks that are passionate about ecology and land management as well. So yeah, just our 2021 planning team. And I just want to put in a plug for Zero Waste Youth USA. Like, we are calling for planning members. So if you're interested in being part of our planning team, we're doing our Convergence March 2023. We're going to piggyback that with the recycling update, NICRA's recycling update, as part of like Zero Waste Week. So yeah, if you would like to join the planning team, feel free to give us your information and we will reach out to you. So we're still building a planning team. We're going to do a kickoff retreat probably in September. So it'll most likely be virtual, our planning. So yeah, just let us know. Open to questions, or we can chat offline. I'll put my email in the chat. So thank you.
So Bonnie, I have one question, then I'll turn it over to others. You mentioned reaching out to the local conservation corps.
Mm-hmm.
It has come up on this show before that it wouldn't be a terrible idea to try to reconfigure more of a 1930s conservation corps, which in those days, young people, college students mostly, went into the woods and did stuff that was helpful to the environment, especially with your talking to the native peoples and the idea that maybe they had a better idea than we did about forest management. Might there be an opportunity for you to partner with the Conservation Corps to create a real college program that would allow college students to thin, wildfire areas? Is that a worthy idea to pursue?
It's not a bad idea, especially if it's connected to skills like job training skills and getting folks connected with the land and traditional land management practices that California needs. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's really about partnerships and getting that funding, and like grant writing is super important. So I'm talking with San Jose Conservation Corps about how can NICRA support them for grant funding opportunities with SB 1383. And because the education component is really important right now with composting, recycling, and what can be landfilled in all the schools. So yeah, it's an important question and idea to explore. There's a lot of opportunity.
It needs money and skills. Susan, did you have a question? Oh. I thought her hand was raised. Any other questions for Bonnie? Well, I'm interested in zero waste use, so thank you for sharing that. I guess that concludes our show for tonight. Every second Tuesday of every month, we have a show. We don't have the program next month completely lined up, but it's probably going to be on the theme, to quote Gary Liss, it's the climate, stupid. So we'll have something about the climate next month. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I will adjourn.
Thank you.